Welcome to this session of Informatica Client Tools, where we understand what are the different tools available for Informatica, PowerCenter, and where the majority of the work goes from the developer perspective. Well, the PowerCenter client application consists of 4 different tools to manage the repository, to design the mappings, applets, sessions, and to schedule the workflows. Let's see each one of the tools and understand what does each of the tool do. Let's start with the PowerCenter designer, where we understand what is the designer is all about and how does the tool look. Okay, I've opened the designer here, and in this, if you look at it, on the left side we have the navigation bar here with the repository, with the list of repositories, and on the right side you have the work area or the workspace, which is this. You don't see anything right now because we are not connected, and this is the output window. So let's say I connect to one of the repositories here and right click on it, right click on any of the folders. Let's say I open demo now, and then this is the work area which comes up. Now mapping designer is the place where we usually import the sources, create the targets, create the transformations, build the logic based on the business requirements, and create the overall flow, which is called the mapping. Okay, now within mapping, under the tools menu, if you look at it, there are 5 different sub tools which we can say. One is the source analyzer, target designer, transformation developer, maplet designer, mapping designer. In source analyzer, we create or import data. So if you go to the sources here, you have wizards with which you can directly pull the metadata of various kinds of sources, like the database, file, COBOL file if you're using one, XML definition, TIBCO, which is directly from an application, PeopleSoft again from an application, or WSDL. Let's say if this is not the kind of source which you want to import, you can go to create, choose the kind of source which you are trying to import, and if you look at this list, it has quite a lot of options with which you can pull the source of that variety which you're looking to use that as a source. Now the same thing is applicable for target designer, where you have a menu, and if you've noticed, the menu keeps changing. When I click on source, you get source. When I click on target, you get the target menu. So under the target again, you have the import wizards, and if you think none of this is applicable to you, click on create and then use the list. Now let's say there is something which is not in the list and not in the create option as well. Then you have to use some other tool, which is a pre-step to ETL, to convert that into one of the formats which Informatica can read, and then use that as either a source or a target. Third one is the transformation developer. Now this is where we develop transformations to use in a mapping. It's not mandatory that you should create the transformations here. You can directly import any of the transformations into your mapping directly. Let's say, for example, if I want to get expression here, I can create it. The only reason we go for transformation developer is whenever you want to create a reusable transformation which you want to use in more than one mapping, or whenever you want to develop a user-defined function to use in any of the expressions. Else we can always use it in the maplet or the mapping. Coming to the maplet designer, there are certain rules or conditions for maplet designer on, when I say rules and conditions, on what transformations to use. Let's say you cannot use XML transformation and some other transformation there, but the overall purpose of maplet designer is to create a group of transformations which you can make them as reusable and use them in any number of mappings whichever are required. Okay, so that's the maplet. I'll repeat that again. You create a group of transformations which you think are required and make them reusable. A simple example there will be, if you consider the employee table, from the employee table, let's assume you want to do a cleansing of or removing the white noise before and after the attributes, like removing the space before and after. You know what are the attributes which are present in the employee table. All you need to do is create a reusable object which will always check if there is any space and trim them if required. Now, if you do that as a maplet, you can use that trimming methodology in any mapping wherever that employee table is used as the source. Okay. If it's confusing, let's hold on to that. When we go to the maplet discussion, it'll be more clear and understandable on why we are doing that. Coming to the mapping designer, this is the final one where we consolidate all the other 4 based on the requirement. By default, for a mapping to be valid, you need to have source, at least one transformation, any one, and a target. So for the mapping to be valid, you should have a source, transformation, and a target. Now, there is no limitation on what or how many transformations you can use within a mapping. It's all the logic and the business requirement which you have. Based on the requirement, you can set as many number of transformations, maplets, whichever are required within your mapping. That's a quick overview of the designer. Now let's go to the other one, which is the workflow manager. In the designer here, from the development perspective, you would spend about 60 to 70% of your time within the designer here. Now let's talk about the workflow manager. Within the workflow manager, you again have 3 different subtools. One is task developer, workload designer, and workflow designer. Under the task developer, we create tasks which are reusable again. Now I keep saying reusable. What does that mean? Reusable is nothing but you create it once or define or configure it once to use it as many number of times as possible wherever it is required. Okay, so within that notation, if you have to use a task or any of the components in either of these 3 called the session, command, and email, you would create them under the task developer. If you do not want them as reusable, you can always create them separately as a standalone option under the workflow designer. Okay, that's the task developer. Under the workflow designer, under the workload designer, you create a workload which is again a set of tasks. Just like the maplet I have said, you can create, let's say, 4 different tasks here, combine all of them together and pull that as a task within your workflow designer. Again, let's hold on to the thoughts of I'm not able to understand it or it's confusing, because we're just reviewing the tools what are available and the subtools so that you get used to the words here. Whenever we go to the individual topic, we'll dig into the details of it, why, what are the preconditions, what are the limitations, and all of it. Right. That's the overview of this tool. And why is this required, or why do we have 2 different tools which we've discussed right now, the mapping designer and the workflow manager? Now, once we create the source, target, the mapping, how would the integration service know where that source file is? Is it on your desktop? Is it on a network shared drive? If it is on a database, what username password is it connecting to? Is it the same for the next environment, QA, UAT, and prod? How do you change it? So all these questions can be answered within the workflow manager, where you can set each of the property in these tasks. Okay. And then let's talk about the repository manager. Now, this is one area where majority of the administrative tasks were done earlier in the previous versions. Now most of these are moved to administration console, and this is specifically used only for deployments and, let's say, changing your password, creating the folders and things like that. Okay, There are uses to it, but we don't log into this tool on a daily basis, and in some of the projects there will be access restrictions to this tool. And the last one, of course, not the least one, is the workflow monitor. Now this is where, as the name suggests, monitor, we monitor all the jobs whichever are running, failing, scheduled, unscheduled, and all of it. So if you look at this screen here, now you have a scheduled job. There are two of them. There is a reason, there is a time which is set for this job to run. Okay. And apart from just looking at two different views, one is called the Gantt chart, the other is the task view, where you can see the time or the overall status of the job. Apart from looking at the status, you can also do multiple actions here. If you look at it, you can restart it, stop, abort, recover, cold start, schedule, unschedule, go to the run properties, analyze what has failed, why it has failed, open the log file, see a step-by-step instruction of what has happened. If it's a failure, what is the cause of the failure? If it's though it has succeeded and it has not processed any records, why? So all of that information can be figured out here. This is definitely a first place for us to start whenever something isn't working as you've expected. Find out why it is not working, and this is also definitely the first place to start for any of your performance specific related issues. So again, the same thing here. You have the navigation, you have the output window here where you can see what workflow has started, what has not. This is the time frame, start time, end time, and this is the time window. Between 9 to 10, what has started. Between 10 to 11, what has worked. So if you go to the task view, you can select on a particular task and that will show you the status of that particular task. All right. Now that's a quick overview of the tools which we will keep working on in this part of the course. Again, it is just to show you, or for you to get used to the naming conventions of the tools and the different tools within it. As and when we progress, we go into the details of it, understand more on the features, limitations, and multiple things there. Okay, please post your questions. Thank you.